All right, this is the Coast to Coast Combat Hour. As always, I'm here with Matt Hawkins. I'm Ed Carbajal, and returning once again is our guest, Dr. Jon Lucas, who I wanted to pick his brain because I saw him complaining on Twitter during UFC 236. How you doing, fellas?
Doing well.
Good, man. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm pissed that Winter doesn't want to leave New Jersey, but other than that, I'm good. I'm good to go. So I mean, I don't know why that found its way on my feed on during the fights on Saturday, but that's kind of why I wanted to pick your brain, just because you seem to do a couple of like a short little Twitter thread on your issues ordering the very first pay-per-view through ESPN Plus. So you want to share your thoughts on it?
Sure. Yeah. I usually don't use Twitter to complain about stuff, but it was extremely frustrating how difficult it was to get that pay per view paid for, and given the problems they've had with illegal streaming in the past, to make the only legal way to get it now nearly impossible to accomplish was not a great idea. So I usually get the pay per views, just through the cable provider like everybody else did. And that was pretty straightforward. And I knew that they were only distributing the pay per views now through ESPN Plus. I bought the ESPN Plus when Matt and I were in Nashville so my wife could watch the Nashville card. And I knew that you had to get the pay per view from a computer. You couldn't do it from like a smart TV app or things like that. So I was actually on their website trying to order the pay per view directly through the ESPN Plus website, and it looked like it would work, and then it just kind of hung up, and then would come up to this screen that everybody was seeing that said something about there's a service problem or something. Please bear with us, and
Oh, wow.
it would not work. Um, for a company the size of ESPN that was trying to build this app and to have this association with the UFC and be the exclusive content provider for the United States, to have that big of a debacle on their opening night was troublesome, not a
Yeah.
good sign. And of course, initially I thought it was just me, but then as soon as you looked on Twitter or looked on any of the forums, there was all sorts of people, including like Michael Bisping, a couple of other fighters, and
Yeah.
MMA media that were complaining about the same thing. So I'm like, oh, it turns out I'm not the only idiot. There's actually a problem here. And even the process of just logging on to the ESPN website as somebody who already has an account wasn't straightforward, because most websites you go to, there's a place where you can log in, and then there's this, where like up in the corner of the screen it says login, and then there's the front page that talks about the benefits of subscription and stuff for people that kind of stumble across it. But on the ESPN site, you actually have to click on or had to that night, had to click on the banner about signing up for the website. And then in the sign up process, it would discover that you already had an account and would tell you that you could get the pay per view for $59.99 or whatever it was. And then that's when you got into that loop where it wouldn't do anything. So it took an entire hour. I missed all of the first two fights before I was finally able to log on.
Oh, wow.
And there was never any statement other than Dana White's statement about, yeah, it didn't go well, we need to do better. But there was never any statement from ESPN Plus or the UFC about what the problem was, why they weren't answering their customer care or service line phones. I had a chat. There's a place on the website where you can set up a chat with a customer service representative.
Yeah.
So I tried to do that, and it just spun for about 10 or 15 minutes, and I finally gave up. So that was not a good showing. I can't wait to see what the pay-per-view numbers are, because I suspect they're going to be awfully low, given that people had to try as hard as they did to get logged on.
I don't think we'll ever see the numbers. I think with ESPN, they basically have total control of it. I know guys like Dave Meltzer. I believe that's how you pronounce his last name. The mainly comes from the wrestling, but he's kind of the number one pay-per-view number guy, and he's basically said that he won't be able to really pull the numbers
Mm.
uh, because it's all digital now. So nobody really he can't go by, I mean, he can get his estimates based off of trending and stuff like that, but he used to be able to, I think, have insiders on the cable companies and direct and satellite companies that would give it to him, and now we're funneling it through ESPN
Yeah,
or Dana
and
White.
today it's Tuesday. We usually don't we get those numbers by now, like, or they say something. So I guess they're, like you said, they're just not going to release them. I guess they'll only release super positive information. I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they're not. I think that's going to be the case.
I'm glad I'm not a fighter who's looking for pay-per-view points.
Yeah. Well, that's a funny thing that you say that, because one of the things Dana White said in the post-fight presser about, like people fighting for titles, he said that's one of the things that they get is pay-per-views, and he said that when talking about the interim titles and stuff like that, at the post-fight presser. So I guess that's still a thing in contract negotiations.
I would just guess that ESPN's prepaid the UFC for the entire 2-year run or however long contract this is. So I think they paid them based off the average of pay-per-view sales for the last, couple years or whatever. So I would think that could go into your negotiating where you're going to go, hey, I headlined a pay-per-view, this month of 2017 and made this much extra, or stuff like that. I imagine there has to be some extra fall put in if the numbers are never made public or released. But you said you missed the first couple fights. When you order through ESPN3, does it give you? Is it in your library, or was it a one-time view and it was gone? Were you able to go back and watch those?
So fortunately, I was.
Okay.
I didn't look until Sunday morning because it was 1:00 in the morning here when the fights were over. So I just went to bed. But the next morning when I opened it up, the fight in its entirety, or at least the main card in its entirety, was in my library. So I was able to watch the first two fights in retrospect, because that's the other issue with the ESPN Plus version of the pay-per-view versus when you get from cable. I'm often, just like this weekend, I was coming back from a boxing event that I was working, and it just so happened I got back in time to catch the pay-per-view. So that's why I was trying to buy it the night of. But normally I'm purchasing it ahead of time, setting my DVR to tape it, getting home, and then trying to fast forward through just the fights to catch up to real time before the main event hits. And with ESPN Plus, you can't do that. There's no rewind, fast forward. It's just live. So when it came on at an hour and 5 minutes in, just kind of picked up from there. And if you get up to go to the bathroom or something like that, you just miss what you miss when you're up. So it's not the exactly state of the art technology.
Wow. So I mean, obviously we didn't bring you on just to complain about ESPN Plus. I mean, so from what you did get to watch, I mean, you just said you're working a boxing event, and for folks that if they don't remember that are listening from the last time, John is involved in this sport. He uses his expertise in the medical field involved in the sport. With we talked to you about regulation and stuff last time. So I mean, I know you're not a judge or whatever, but what did you think about the judging that went on for that event? I might be alone. I know the one fight stood out to folks. I wrote an article about it at MMAnews.com. But I mean, I don't know overall, because like obviously everyone's talking about the co-main and main event fights. To me, I saw them as split decisions, not unanimous decisions. What do you guys think?
So, I always tell people I never really see a fight as a split decision because, it can be close and I can see how it could be a split decision, but I never really predict it to be that. But I wouldn't have been surprised if it was. I think they got the results correct. I was a little surprised at the actual scorecards, but it is what it is. I don't think anybody got robbed per se in this event.
Yeah, go ahead.
I would say I didn't look to see who the judges were this time. I saw some scorecards, but didn't look at the names. Do you know who the three judges were?
No, I didn't see the names either. I know we could find out, but I should have looked for them, especially for the Juban Grant fight.
Yeah, when you say split decision, Ed, I mean, I think John's kind of on this. It confuses me a little bit because I don't mean to, come down on you or be confused, but I just don't. When you say split decision, you mean you think that it should have been two judges giving the fight to somebody and one judge to the other?
For me, it was like harder to call to unanimous for one guy.
So yeah, okay, I get that, but so I guess that would be where I would come in, and where you thought it should be maybe a split decision, or not thought it should be, but surprised that it wasn't, I should say.
Yeah.
So for like the Gastelum fight, now I mainly watched the co-main and the main event from Ruth Chris Steakhouse for my sister's birthday. I've watched fights at her wedding, and I managed to get them on my phone at the steakhouse. So I didn't have full concentration on it, but from what I saw for the Adesanya Gastelum fight, one, it was a great fight. I did catch that. when I, watching it, and again, I should watch it under a fine tooth comb. But when I first watched it, when I saw Adesanya basically manhandle him in the last round,
Yeah.
in my mind, I had it scored a draw. I had it 3-1 going into the final round, and then I had Adesanya winning the last round 10-8.
Yeah.
And I was rooting for Kelvin. I know we picked him, so it could be a little bit of bias in there. But I had him getting round 1, round 3, round 4, and then I had Adesanya winning 2 and 5 handily. So I scored it a draw. When it was called, I was fine with the decision because I felt like the right guy won under pride rules. Or if it's gonna go to somebody, then I felt like based off that last round, the right guy probably won the fight.
Yeah.
If it wasn't going to be a draw. So I had no problem with that one. I saw your articles on the Grant Joban fight, so I actually went back and found that fight online and watched it yesterday. And I'm not sure exactly what your stance is. Is your stance that I thought it was a really close, boring fight. I didn't see a lot of action. I like both guys, so I really wasn't a bias going into it. I was more just curiosity based off of some of the articles and comments that I've seen. But I can't really complain with that fight. The numbers show like 10 punches each landed around, which isn't a whole lot to separate. I think it's weird because when I watched it, I thought Joban won the second round, but when I looked on the play-by-play on like MMA Fighting or something, they actually gave the second round to Grant, and the numbers would have went to Joban, and so the rounds were kind of mixed and mashed on how I saw it while doing a little research. But I mean, I just thought it was a terrible fight, to be honest. And if you're gonna throw, if you're gonna land 6 punches in a round, I just don't see how you can complain about losing a 29-28 decision.
Yeah, and I agree with that assessment. That those kind of fights where there's such little offensive action are nearly impossible to judge, because if you discredit one punch or blink at the wrong time, you've missed something. It's really hard to have something to go on with that. Both guys were kind of tentative, and that was hard.
So I mean, but isn't I actually. Maybe it's because I was watching it in a bar because I didn't want to go through what you went through trying to order or signing up for stuff. And I don't know if you guys saw that. Apparently, DirecTV is only working with the bars for pay-per-views, or at least Buffalo Wild Wings. I took a screenshot of the screen waiting for the event to start, and I put it on Twitter. But but I didn't see. Usually, they put how what types of rules they're using, based on where they're at the beginning of the event, and since I was out with friends, I wasn't paying attention like that. But isn't aggression part of the scoring too, or do they not do that anymore?
No, I think aggression is part of the scoring, but I thought the first round, I thought Grant was the one coming forward. I will agree that in the second and third, Joban was the one that was coming forward. But let me see. I actually took a screenshot of so I got the strike totals. So in the first round, Grant outstrikes him 14-7. In the second round, Joban outstrikes him 10-6. And in the third round, Joban outstrikes him 11-10. So, I mean, when you have, and I thought it was clear Grant landed the bigger strikes. So to me, if you wobble a guy, but you land 5 less punches in a fight, or you're a little less aggressive, it just, to me, it wasn't necessarily a robbery. But I could see it either way. But
yeah, and the criteria for judging, or when I've heard him described before, I think I can picture Big John saying this. They're tiered. So effective striking and grappling is tier 1.
Oh, okay.
Then, if that's pretty much the same, then aggression plays a big role as the next tier, and then last is octagon control. But if you go in and if Matt and I are fighting and I land 47 punches, but Matt was running at me the whole time, it looked to be more aggressive, I still win because I was landing the effective striking.
Okay. Yeah, that makes more sense then in that case, I guess. All right. I mean, I don't know. I guess because I was watching with my training partners, and when they announced that decision, we were just kind of like, what the fuck? Like, we kind of had the same reaction Joban had. So, yeah, that's why.
Yeah, I mean,
I was happy to see he did that interview right after with Akamoto.
Yeah, I mean, obviously he was fired up about it, and he probably thought he won the fight. Especially when you're coming forward, I can see that in his head. I understand that as a competitor, the frustration of coming at somebody and having them essentially backstepping. But I just felt like, again, I don't think there was really any winner in the fight. If I had my way, it's a draw. I wish we had more draws in MMA because I don't think anybody deserved necessarily a double pay for that fight per se. But I don't. The announcers basically were on board with it being a close fight. Cormier and Anik, and I guess Rogan, all three of them basically were saying that during the whole fight that they were not sure how it was going to be scored. When Joban did get that last takedown in the last 10, 15 seconds of the third round, they all kind of felt like that might have been the decider. So I would have to say, based off their opinions, they don't show a scorecard like they kind of used to about,
Mm.
the color man. They kind of lend toward Joban, but it was just a close fight. I didn't think it was anything necessarily as a robbery, but I
Yeah,
can understand Joban's frustration.
if I remember correctly, as soon as the fight was over, I think it was Rogan was saying when Joban was so upset, was saying you can't have a fight with that few strikes thrown and be upset about a close decision.
Mm.
I think that's accurate. I hate to see anybody lose a fight they shouldn't have, but I don't see that as an example of a fight that definitely went the wrong way.
Mm. All right. Yeah. I mean, I didn't even hear that because of where I was at. So, I mean, I don't know if you saw that interview Joe Ban did with Akamoto, John, but one of the things he recommended was like, as far as trying to nullify things like that from happening again, he talked about like a half point system or possibly having 5 judges instead of 3. Has any of that ever come across the table in anything you're involved with?
It has not at any of the high levels. I've never heard anything like that. The 5 judge thing, that's Joe Rogan's baby. He brings that up every once in a while on his podcast about 5 or 7 or 21, some odd number of judges. But I'm not sure that increasing the number of judges is going to help. I still maintain that the correct way is to make sure the judges that we have sitting ringside know what they're watching and know what the actual criteria for judging are. So they're doing their job, consistently and correctly. And unfortunately, in many athletic commissions, that is not the case. You've got people that are well known for making demonstrably bad decisions consistently, and nothing's done about it. So until we get people that know what they're doing in those seats, it doesn't matter whether you've got 3 of them, 5 of them, or 115. You're still going to wind up with decisions we're not happy about.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not opposed to the 5 judged thing. I think that might help in the long run, at least getting rid of some of the terrible over the top decisions. There's still going to be controversy, but I think that might eliminate when you have one just totally corrupt judge who has no idea what he's watching, it
Yeah.
obviously opens the door for that,
Or one that's publicly said he's biased against certain fighters. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, stuff like that. You open it up for a little bit more possibilities of correct decisions, but yeah, I
So
don't know. I almost feel like they should all 3 judges should be sitting like in a skybox watching the fight on monitors.
that's actually I was gonna say that's something they tried here in Jersey, in Atlantic City. They did that. I think they did that at CFFC or something like that. Is that what do you think about that, John? I mean, is that something that you think would be more along the lines of being fair because they're not being swayed by the crowd and stuff?
Yeah,
That's the reasoning behind it.
There's a couple of ACs that have recently, and it may have even been for a UFC fight, had the guy sitting ringside, but they had noise canceling headphones on or available. So yeah, I think that's a great idea because it's definitely true. Even if you're not trying to be biased, if you're sitting ringside, especially at some of the smaller local events I go to, where there's the hometown guy and then some dude from points unknown that's in fighting, every time the hometown guy does anything that even looks remotely like it was an effective strike, the crowd goes wild like it was a near knockout. Meanwhile, the other guy can be slugging away and the crowd's completely silent or booing. So it's hard not to let that affect your thinking.
Yeah. Did that ever catch wind with you guys in the industry? I feel like that never went anywhere.
What are you talking about?
The judges being in a locked room, away from everything and watching on a monitor.
Yeah, I've never heard that discussed at higher levels, but like I said, I know there's been a couple of events where that's been the case, and I think one of them might have been a UFC. I don't have a reference. I'd have to look that up online, but I read about that on a forum someplace, and I remember seeing a fight where and it may have been one of the, it may have been a Legacy or something like that, one of the smaller promotions. But I remember seeing the guy sitting ringside with the big earmuffs on while they were there. But I think that would have to be a decision that comes from the individual athletic commissions, because, we can't even get the unified rules to be unanimous around the country, much less things like judging and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Well, we obviously had the judging issues. Again, the main event went to the scorecards too, but it was really an all-time classic fight, and I think one that everybody kind of saw coming. I know the odds makers had Holloway winning. I know Ed and I both predicted Poirier along with Cutman Matt last week, and fight kind of went as I thought it would go. I know in our breakdowns, we both thought Poirier would have the size and strength advantage, and that would kind of be what would be the decision maker. And I think despite Holloway really turning it on the last 3 rounds, I think the damage that was done early in that fight is really what carried Poirier to the victory. Any surprises in that fight for either one of you guys?
No, I was just pleasantly surprised that that fight delivered what we were expecting. I mean, that was definitely a fight for the ages. I'm so glad that I was able to watch that live. I mean, it was fantastic, a great fight, and I think it's important to point out what a great job Blake Grice, who, as you know, is a friend of mine that did his first ever main event reffing, did a great job reffing that fight. Interfered almost never during the entire fight. It was a great fight.
Yeah, it really was. I mean, I think one of the points where, like Matt said, that the cuts and the damage he did early is obviously what helped him later. But I mean, I was so surprised at Holloway's ability to come back and actually make me. I'm not concerned. I don't know what the word was, but it was just the back and forth. There's points where I thought Holloway was about to get the finish before Poirier was able to fire back at him. And but I do think his mass did play a factor. Even when I feel like maybe he was taking a break, because the guy with the bigger muscles, they need more oxygen to do the level of output that he was doing. So I feel like there was the times that he wasn't throwing any, and Holloway was able to land those combos that he landed. That's because he was just trying to take a breather, and Holloway was taking advantage. But I mean, that's what you want to see, man. I mean, it's so crazy that these fights were for interim titles because it's just like I was joking around with Matt leading up to the event. He put something on I think it had to be Facebook that it was like, oh, these great interim title fights, and I was just like, yeah, interim titles, woo. But I mean, I guess there's the incentive to know that you're going to be the guy to fight for a unification bout in your next fight. Really turned it up for all 4 competitors.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that more important than the interim title of the bout is that you get 5 rounds. I know every once in a while we get really terrible fights, and probably no one would have wanted to watch 5 rounds of Joban Grant. But when you get guys at this level, I feel like I've always kind of felt like the sport needed 5 rounds to really allow fights to develop. And not just be rock'em sock'em robots for 15 minutes, but allow a guy like Holloway, who's known for his cardio, to be able to really retaliate. I mean, if it was a 7-round fight, I think Holloway wins that fight. So not, I mean, and obviously you can go on, but it's one of those things where it's a whole nother aspect. And I just feel like when you get, I feel like we've been robbed with 3-round fights in big fights more than we've sat through boring 5-rounders. So, I don't know. I've always kind of thought that the whole main card should be 5 rounds, and we should just kind of deal with it. And and that was maybe when the cards were a little more stacked. A card like this was really top heavy with 2 great fights and kind of 3 mid-level fights. Obviously, Khalil Roundtree had kind of a breakout performance against Eric Anders and really laid a whooping on him that I didn't see coming. But
go
ahead.
I would say that was the fight that I was most surprised at. I thought for sure this was going to be the beginning of Eric Anders' breakout. And yeah, he just had nothing for Khalil. It was really that was hard to watch.
Yeah, I had him picked. Actually, I had him picked to win too, so it was hard for me to watch. as well. John, one question, just because we were talking about that the main event, as far as like Holloway, with all the stuff that he's had happen in the past, and I think we might have talked about it last time we had you on too. Like as someone in the as a medical professional, the way that he fights, I mean, when you obviously you love watching the fight, but afterward, you know, with everything that's happened to him, the 2 times he got pulled off of cards, and then you see what happened this past weekend. When you think about his future, are you like, are you concerned for him, like hanging it up soon or anything like that?
You know, it's hard to say. Yeah, I mean, being in those kind of wars like that drag on for the whole 5 rounds, where you're both taking and giving damage the entire
Mm.
time, are definitely not good for you long term. I don't know that he's got anything going on that's going to make him have to retire in the near future, but I worry as he has more and more fights like that he's going to be one of the guys that is not quite the same when he retires as he was going into the sport.
Yeah.
I hope I'm wrong about that, and I hope that he's got guys around him that are, you know, trying to help keep him safe. But a lot of guys that fight like that spar like that too. You know, they're in gym
Yeah.
stuff like that all the time. So hopefully his camp isn't doing stuff like that, and the only time he's taking damage like that is during these actual fights.
Well, he's kind of this first generation of fighters now in their prime that grew up with the sport. You know, that were doing mixed martial arts when he was probably 8 years old. You know, he was training in a mixed martial arts. So that's where we're kind of different now, because back in the day you'd see a guy like you know, I don't know, Mark Coleman or something, and you knew he was getting old, but he had his first fight when he was like 34 years old or 33 years old. So you
Yeah.
kind of go, okay, even though he's 42 now, he still has only had 20 fights. Um, you know, 25 fights. Holloway's at 24 fights into his career, and he's only 27 years old.
Hmm.
So I think we might find out really the long-term effects of the sport when, not necessarily Max, but when guys like Max, who start fighting professionally when they're 18, 19 years old, um, when they all of a sudden have 50, 60 fights and they're 36, do they walk away? You know, when does your career kind of come to an end,
Yeah.
really, in martial arts, as opposed to the Severns, the Coutures, the Colemans, uh, you know, even Hoist Gracie, I think, was 27, 26, 27 when he fought his first fight. Um, Guys like that. So I'm kind of curious to see how that unfolds. I can't imagine we'll see guys like Holloway turning in careers like Coleman and Fry and these guys into their early to mid 40s. I just don't see that happening.
Yeah, and I hope not, because that's what I was going to say. Is that's, I think, something that's very important for these guys is, you know, make your run at the title, but you need to have people around you that tell you, all right, we've tried this, it's not working, we've had a couple losses, you know, the sport has passed you by, it's time to get out before you take the fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth fight that you shouldn't be in, and you're just taking damage for really no reason.
So that's kind of like I brought it up because that's kind of like the segue into the whole bare knuckle boxing thing that seems to be I guess it's still sort of trending. I read an article on Forbes today that was kind of weird to me, but from your point of view, as a doctor involved in combat sports, is this something dangerous? Because it seems like the guys that are coming into bare knuckle are the guys that kind of went through their prime years in MMA, most of them anyway. And I mean, obviously we have Paulie Malignaggi, but um, does that scare you as a doctor to see that happening?
I mean, a little bit, but I think in general, bare knuckle boxing could be safer from a brain standpoint. You know, it's definitely not better from a cut standpoint, but getting cuts on your face is not a life threatening problem where CTE is.
Hmm.
The only concern I have about the bare knuckle boxing promotions is they're bare knuckle, but they're still letting the guys wrap their hands in their wrist. And so they're still punching like they weren't bare knuckled, even though they are. And what makes bare knuckle safer is that if your hand is at risk of fracture because it's not casted up in wraps and tape and then with the glove stuffed on it, you're going to have to be a little bit more judicious about when you throw bombs. And as you've seen from the fights, they're exciting because those guys are just winging punches at each other with reckless abandon, and they're not breaking their hands constantly because of the way they're wrapped. So if they really want to do bare knuckle the way that it probably ought to be done, they need to ditch the wraps. And you may see some more hand fractures, but I think you'll see guys be a little bit more judicious with their striking, which would be far safer from a CTE standpoint. But that's, you know, obviously that's not what the fans are looking for.
Hmm.
Is bare knuckle banned in South Carolina?
I don't believe it's outright banned, and I've heard rumors that they've been in discussion with a couple of the organizations about having an event. And I know that the commission is open to that idea, but I haven't heard those discussions going anywhere, and I haven't heard anybody talking about a specific like date for an event or something like that. But I wouldn't be surprised to see them head in our direction.
Obviously, there's a rumored King of the Cage event or a scheduled King of the Cage event coming up in a couple of weeks, and then you got the UFC Greenville card. You have you heard from the Greenville people? Are you, or not the Greenville people, but the UFC about that event? Are you pretty much locked into work that show?
Yeah, so I'm supposed to be the lead physician for the UFC card and have a couple guys that they have worked a number of events with me before. And actually, you may have heard of them. They run a company called the Fight Doctors that helps some people with their weight cuts and a lot of performance things. And they're up in Spartanburg. It's Ari Kramer and Chris Chittum, a neurosurgeon and a vascular surgeon, are going to help me out in that card. And then another guy who I know that I've worked with before, it's a orthopedic surgeon in my hospital system, is going to work with us, and hopefully Ari or Chris will bring a resident or somebody to do suturing and stuff in the back. So we've got a pretty good team that's experienced. Everybody, and those guys both train as well. They're both blue belts in jiu-jitsu, and they co-own an MMA gym. So people that are involved with the sport and knowledgeable about it and have worked ringside before. So it should be a good event from a medical standpoint.
I know that you're Carl Reed, one of your friends and people that you train with and trains with Stephen Thompson. He signed again with the Dana White Contender
Yeah,
Series.
Contender Series.
So I think he's fighting on June 1st. Is there anybody from your school that got a call for the UFC event, or are they going to wait and see if he gets a quick knockout and maybe try to turn him around?
Yeah, so we're still waiting to hear anything about that. The signing of Carl, everybody was excited that might be potentially related to this event, but that would be a really quick turnaround from the Contender Series if he was to be on the Greenville card. And then likewise with Steven, he's still on medical suspension from the fight with Pettis out in Nashville. So there's been talks about from the UFC about possibly having him on that card, but we haven't heard anything further about that yet. So as it stands now, there's only 4 fights confirmed for the card and the Raw undercard folks. We haven't heard any announcement of the big main event kind of stuff as of yet.
Yeah, I know Dana basically mentioned, I think during their last press conference, that's the only event right now that's scheduled that doesn't have a main event. So he's working on it. I imagine whether it's right or wrong for Steven's health, I'm sure he's sitting around waiting to, in Dana White's world and the UFC's world, they want to see a big thumbs up from them and
Yeah.
obviously have him on the card if possible.
And medically, Steven's fine now. He hasn't been officially cleared because the suspension is a time thing, so he's got to go through that. But I mean, he was back literally the Monday after, back at the school teaching karate, and he's on no contact, so he can't spar or really train seriously now. But he's doing what he can do. He's doing cardio. He posted an Instagram video the other day of him working over one of the grappling bags. So I mean, he's right back at it, but it's a matter of whether the timing is right for him or not.
Hey, I got a question for you, just as far as like regulatory and states accepting. Like, obviously, if you're one of the voices that I mean, obviously, there's documentation out there that like MMA went through it, obviously, for the last 20 years. So, and it looks like bare knuckle goes through it. I mean, but if they have guys like you that they use for feedback and stuff, how much weight does your opinion like carry when you make recommendations? I mean, is it about money or safety?
I would suspect that my recommendations are not taken with a lot of weight. I'm not a member of the South Carolina Athletic Commission currently. There's a physician position on the commission. That's a rhyming mouthful, but it's not me. So that the person who sits in that position, if they actually go to meetings, would be the person who probably has the loudest mouthpiece of that. I know the chairman of the commission pretty well, and he and I talk on a fairly regular basis about stuff. Either when he has a question, I bring it up, or when I see him at events and things like that. But as a general rule, I don't really have a whole lot of voice as far as regulatory things.
Yeah, because the thing you mentioned about how it's safer because their hands aren't wrapped up and they're not hitting as hard because they're trying to protect their own hands. That's one of the things that David Feldman mentioned to me when I interviewed him prior to the last event when he was here in New York. So I'm just wondering, why it's because yeah, I don't know if you heard him say that June event's supposed to be in New England somewhere, and I'm just wondering like why. I know New York is not going to accept it because of the blood and the cuts, but it's like you have every other combat sport. I just find it weird that all these weird combat sports. I mean, it's probably the oldest version of a fight sport,
Right.
and they just seem to find it worse for some reason.
Yeah, I mean, you're dealing with the folks that still ban the 12-6 elbow, and I mean, we actually talked about that at the last year's ABC commission, um, and everybody knows that the 12-6 elbow is no more dangerous than any other elbow, or is it? There's no evidence that it's more dangerous than other elbows. It got banned based on when they were coming up with the original rules. One of the commissioners said, "Hey, I saw people breaking bricks like that, so we can't have folks doing that." And it's just something that's just not likely to change. There
Hmm.
was a study going on for a while, I think in Alabama a year or so ago. They were looking for fighters to come down there and throw elbows at different angles onto one of those force pads to show, what the difference in force depending on what direction you threw it in. But I never heard anything about that, so I'm assuming it fell apart because it's been long enough. I would have expected that to be out had it shown something interesting. So it either was not interesting or it didn't show what they were hoping, or I think more likely it just never got off the ground.
So, and the last thing I wanted to ask you was just I know you had done a couple interviews already about the whole Dillashaw thing with his getting suspended and stuff. Um, I know I don't want to make you blow hot air or whatever, but what was your initial reaction just to the what he tested for and how it was handled?
So I think the most surprising thing about the whole situation for me was that they weren't testing for EPO pretty regularly. Because I mean, just looking at the guys that you see fighting, there's a lot of people in professional MMA that look like they're carrying more muscle than their frame should be carrying,
Hmm.
and also have unbelievable cardio. And those two things don't go together very well. Your heart's only so big, so if you're meant to be 155 pounds, but get muscled up to be 170, 185 pounds, and then cut down for your fight, you would expect cardio to be a major issue. And there's people, and TJ being one of them, that just have seemingly endless gas tanks, which is pretty suspicious for either blood doping from the old-fashioned drawing your blood and giving it back to yourself, or abusing EPO. So I was pretty surprised that they hadn't been testing more regularly for it. Um, I thought that the issue was that they had come up with a newer test that was able to find a recombinant EPO more easily. And there's some articles that suggest that's the case, but then the USADA folks told Dana White that they have not historically tested everybody for EPO. So I think that from a cost saving standpoint, they were kind of watching people's biological passports and profiles and looking for people who have hematocrits that are doing weird things and maybe focusing their tests on them. And that's probably what tripped up TJ. He probably had some hematocrit jumps that didn't make a lot of sense that made him decide they needed to test and see if he was supplementing, and they were able to prove that he did.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly find it weird that he got so small. He cut to 125, and that's the fight that they caught him for, and I thought he looked horrible for that.
Yeah, and I think there's been some other people who have gotten caught with steroids that didn't make a lot of sense. Like they had a terrible fight and then they popped positive afterwards for a steroid that anybody would know would show up on a urine test. And when they've interviewed the fighter about it, they've said, I was having trouble in my camp. I was in trouble. I just needed something to try to bridge that gap. And it may have been the same thing for him. He may have been having a bad time and been like, man, my cardio's not where it belongs. I've got this big fight coming up. I can't back out. I need to do this. I certainly don't know that he's done this in the past. There was a rumor that they had tested one of his prior fights and he turned positive, but I heard today that that's literally just a rumor. USADA denied that, I believe, earlier today. They haven't found him positive at other events as far as I know.
Does EPO have any kind of real health benefit? I know some of the
Yeah.
PEDs have legit health benefits. I
No,
mean,
Yeah, so EPO is designed for kidney failure patients. When people have really bad kidney disease, because that's where erythropoietin or EPO is produced in your kidneys, they're oftentimes their biggest problem with their life is they have no energy because their hematocrit is so low. So it was designed in the 80s to help those folks out, and it was absolutely life-changing for a lot of people that have very, very severe kidney disease. And then people in other situations, like after having operations or things like that, I've had patients that have avoided transfusions because they've been able to get EPO to get their own hematocrit up fast enough they don't need to get somebody else's blood. So yeah, it of all this of the performance enhancing drugs, it probably has the most significant actual medical use. But within a year of it being released, the cycling folks realized that being able to get their hematocrit up dramatically, very easily and very quickly would give them a huge advantage. So it very quickly became abused, and it continues to be widely abused in endurance sports.
But from a healthy fighter's perspective, it really doesn't have any kind of usefulness. Like it's not something that's going to help you recover from a ligament injury or something like that. I'm asking this because I've been to one of those guys who's never been blinded to the fact that I feel like all sports, but especially combat sports, have always been based around a little bit of a PED use by its fighters. And I've always been under the camp that says it's hard to do something this strenuous on your body without having to possibly use some stuff to recoup and get back to be able to train and be able to fight again. Um, and I've thought that in my mind, I've always thought that there should be an option where the UFC gets a doctor or has a panel of doctors, and they issue out a certain level of stuff to the fighters. They say, okay, if I go out and blow my knee, the doctor's going to give me some kind of prescription so I can get back to working at my job. Would it be possible to have something like that where they go, where where it's a strict regulation and they go, you're allowed to have this level, and it's given by a specific doctor that's, a panel of doctors of 30 doctors across the country who go, okay, if you need to take this to recover from a knee injury, we can do levels of it without going over, or is that just opening up too many too much of Pandora's box?
One, it's opening up Pandora's box, and two, PED, steroids in particular, don't really have a specific medical use like that. That's the risks of taking them is way out of proportion to the potential benefit for recovery and things like that. All you're losing by not using PED is time. So, if you have a knee injury or something like that, that maybe taking a steroid could potentially help your healing a little bit, the same healing would take place just over a potentially little bit longer period of time. So you don't see orthopedic surgeons giving steroids to patients other than like people who are elderly or things like that and can't get the muscle mass back on their own. But there's really not any significant medical use for from a recovery standpoint or surgical recovery and stuff like that for those sort of drugs. And EPO in particular, unless you're profoundly anemic, EPO is very dangerous. There's been a large number of cyclists that have died from both myocardial infarctions and strokes because of the increased viscosity of their bloodstream at the higher hematocrit. So you for sure are not going to find physicians who would be willing to, with their license on the line and publicly give athletes any dose of EPO to try to kind of stretch their hematocrit to be a little bit higher, that kind of stuff.
So how do they get it then? Like, where do they get it from Mexico or something? Like they go. Like...
I don't. You'd have to ask TJ where he got it from. But, there's tons of ways. It's just like all the opiates that people get. Most of them they start with a doctor's prescription and then that runs out, and then they start buying it from their friend who gets it from a friend. So I would imagine that some people who are taking EPO are probably getting EPO that was intended for a renal patient, or it could be stolen. It's not the hardest thing in the world to manufacture, so there's illicit sources for it. Just like all the steroids, there's not, as far as I know, there's not currently any anabolic steroid that's used clinically in the United States. So all the stuff that's produced is produced elsewhere and used specifically in illicit fashion for bodybuilders and fighters and other athletes and things like that.
All right, cool. I mean, that's just that definitely background on it that I didn't know. I mean, I hadn't even heard those 3 letters before this happened. So, and I know it's one of the, and then I've come to find out that it's one of the things that was like the go to cheating drug for other sports in the past. So, Matt, I know you wanted to look at the weekend card. I forgot what it was called or where it's happening, but go ahead, man.
Yeah, I know you're not the ESPN Plus guy. No, I'm not going to go through the whole card. It basically I mean, there is a ton of Russian talent. It really looks like one of those classic ACB cards that they used to have before the transition. But basically, the main event. It's funny we go from PEDs to Overeem versus Oleanek in Russia, which is I know. I know firsthand that some of the bodybuilders and stuff used to actually get some stuff from Russia in the mail years ago. But yeah, so basically the Overeem Alexei Oleanek fight, the headliner, great heavyweight fight, kind of a stylistic clash.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. It's a fight that I look forward to. One I'll definitely watch. As far as picking a winner in that fight, my brain's telling me Overeem will be hard to take down and wear at Oleanek, but so I'm going to go with Overeem. I want to go with Oleanek. I'd like to see him get a submission win, and I know he's older, but he would be a new blood challenger for some of these guys, and he's such great submissions with some great wins in his career. But I got to go for Overeem. I'm going to go with like a knee knockout in the clinch, maybe in the 3rd round or so, when Oleanek's a little tired from trying to take him to the ground. What do you think, John? You look into that fight at all?
My brain tells me the same thing, that Overeem's going to probably find a way to knock him out at some point. But between his grappling and he seems like he's sneaky. He always kind of finds a way to get something done. I think Oleanek has a good chance of at some point during one of those exchanges of grabbing onto him and dragging him to the ground and dragging him to the cage and setting up a submission that Overeem doesn't see coming. I'm gonna say I'm gonna go with Oleanek, even though my brain tells me otherwise. I'm still going with Oleanek.
That's interesting. I mean, that's an interesting take on Oleanek, how he could possibly approach it. I don't know their dimensions off the top of my head, but I feel like Overeem might be the guy that has the reach advantage, and being a striker, off the top. Before we start talking about it, I'm still going to stick with the pick of Overeem, only because if I remember, from what I remember of Oleanek, I don't think he handles getting hit very well. I mean, nobody does really, but I think he's a bleeder, and with the reach advantage, and I know Overeem still packs a lot of power. I feel like he might actually, if he lands anything solid, I think he can drop him early, maybe even in the clinch, like Matt said. But either way, I think I don't think Overeem will even try to clinch with him. I think he'll try to avoid all that and use his reach, to take him out early.
I'm actually looking at their numbers right now. In spite of Overeem being 6'4" to 6'1" over Oleanek, they're both on Tapology website. Both are showing an 80-inch reach. So that's kind of interesting. So, I mean, I ran into Oleanek. I actually met him at the last Fedor fight, and he was a big dude. And says he's 6'1". I feel like he might even be a little taller than that, and was a real heavyweight. So I don't know. Like I said, I'm rooting for him. I know he's 41, so it's not really new blood. And he's had 70 or so fights between the two of them. I think we're looking at about 120, 130 career fights. So it's kind of an old school. I mean, they really did a good job of loading this card with, like I said, with Russians. The most inexperienced guy is 6-0. When you get into Russian MMA, you have guys that have good. There's a lot of good records. A lot because the guys they're not necessarily dealing with the commissions we have here, so they're able to fight a lot more. So I don't know. It should be an exciting fight. I think it starts at 7 a.m. My time. I think 10 a.m. Your guys' time on the East Coast. So
yeah,
be interesting. So we're getting close to signing off here. I want to say a couple things. One, I don't know all the information about Angela Magana. She was supposed to fight. I know she's not a huge fan favorite, but apparently she's dealing with some serious health issues today after having surgery. I'm looking at updates, and she still has not woken up from surgery. They're actually putting some pre-op videos of her on her website that apparently she kind of wanted out. And I haven't watched the videos, but it looks like it's kind of her talking about fear of surgery and stuff. So it's kind of a sad situation. Hopefully we get more updates on that. And, you know, considering I've met you guys through the forums, last week on the MMAcommunity.com, I don't know if you saw this, Ed, but Frankie NYC, somebody who had actually asked to come on our show, passed away.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it was, I don't know the details. I don't. Part of the reason we were hesitant about having him on the show is because we were hesitant about having somebody on who wasn't willing to kind of say who they are. We didn't know who he was, and this was in the beginning of him showing up on the forums. But he turned out to be somebody who really knew his stuff and seemed to be fairly respected. I know he was respected on the MMAcommunity.com and some of the bigger financial guys in the industry. But yeah, he went from talking to people on the forum at like 1 a.m. in the morning to by about 8 a.m. that morning. Apparently, there was reports of him passing away in the hospital. So I guess rest in peace. Wish I would have got to know the guy a little bit more and had a chance to speak with him other than our few private messages we had. But like I said, considering I've met you guys and you guys are two good friends that I met from the forums, it hits home a little bit, and it's just shows how small the world is and how important life is when you can go from talking to somebody and then hours later they're gone without it being a tragic car accident or something and just happening in the hospital. So best to him and his family in this and obviously this tough times.
Yeah.
With that said, John, do you want to throw out your Twitter handles, any sponsors, your school, any other information?
So I'll throw out our school. So I train at Pitch Black MMA or Upstate Karate here in Simpsonville, South Carolina, and we're actually in the process. They're going to start pouring concrete on our new school this coming Tuesday. So in a couple of months, we'll be moving to a much bigger space on the other side of town with a little over 6,000 square feet of mat space. So we're all real excited about that. My handle on Twitter and Instagram and all that is SCMMAMD, just like it is on the MMA community.
All right. And fans can always follow us at Combat Hour on Twitter. Follow myself at MMAHawk21 on Twitter and Instagram. You can follow Ed at Carbazol on Twitter and at Carbeerzol on Instagram. It is Risen Fight Week too.
Yeah, right.
Through the crack, Horiguchi fighting.
The 21st. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's so the UFC Saturday morning, late Saturday night, early Sunday morning, depending on your time zone. On Fight TV is Risen 25. Don't miss that if you get a chance, and we'll see all that action. I look forward to talking to you again next weekend, and I'll keep in touch, John. I know we're getting together for UFC in July, so
yep.
I'll keep you updated on that ticket information.
Thanks for your time, John. I appreciate it.
Anytime, man. Thanks for having me.